It's the holiday season, and the Detroit Lions are making a list and checking it twice as they put together a game plan to get back into contention in 2016. We're in a festive mood here at the Two-Man Advantage podcast and want to give the Lions tools to success and keys to victory heading into 2016. For that, we turn to an old and trusted friend, Mike Payton, editor of Sideline Report, as he gives the Lions an off-season to-do list. First of all, Mike, we want to say happy holidays to you and welcome back to the Two-Man Advantage podcast.
Hey, happy holidays to you too, Kevin. Thanks for having me back.
So, Mike, when we look at what the Lions have done recently, obviously the Monday night game against New Orleans, they had a bit of an offensive explosion. I think the first 4 possessions in the first half, they scored touchdowns. And after the game, the team seemed to credit new offensive coordinator Jim Caldwell. So it looks like he's really making a difference, huh?
Yeah, I think, definitely you've seen a major difference since Jim Caldwell has taken over. There's a lot more simplicity in the offense. You don't see a whole lot of the slow developing plays that were really killing them when they were under Joe Lombardi. You've definitely seen them score a lot more with the games against Philadelphia and, of course, New Orleans this past Monday. But you're still seeing that problem when they get into the second half after a big lead. They're really slowing it down and becoming a conservative team. They're still not showing that killer instinct that's going to get them, some success in the future. And I think that's really something that the Lions and their fans should be concerned about.
Now, when we talk about it's the holiday season, of course. So, what do you think is the best Christmas present Santa could leave the Lions this offseason this year?
Definitely a new GM, a new head coach that understands how to utilize this team's talent and understands what to do on offense. Get rid of these bubble screens and these 1-yard runs by Joik Bell, and let's utilize guys like Eric Ebron in the way that they're supposed to be. Send him downfield. You really saw in that New Orleans game the kind of speed that Eric Ebron can have. That is why they drafted him, not to block and be your classic tight end, but to be a playmaker. And you could see on Monday that he's capable of making those types of plays. So, and obviously you got to get Calvin Johnson back in the game plan.
Yeah, speaking of Calvin Johnson, I think he's had 2 catches in the last 2 games combined. So can you tell me what do you think contributes to his lack of productivity in the offense?
Well, I think it goes right back to the conservative play call that Jim Caldwell and Jim Caldwell have put together. I don't know what the problem is. You go back to Sean Linehan, and if Calvin Johnson was covered by 2 or 3 people, he's still open. I still think that the Lions should play by that rule, and I think that they're a little bit afraid when when Calvin will take on a safety over the top as well as the corner that's covering him. And I think they're just afraid to take that shot. They've got to not be able to. They've got to not be afraid to go to Calvin. I mean, the guy can out jump just about anybody. We've seen him do just miraculous things in the recent past. So I think you definitely have to trust Calvin Johnson, and I'm afraid they just don't for some reason.
Now, you had recently wrote something about the future of Calvin Johnson on a Sideline Report, and you had laid out mostly why you think he's still a productive player, and it came up again this week during media availability about his and Matthew Stafford's future. Both of them had said obviously it's not in their hands and they want to still be here. But do you think, obviously, they will be back next year?
Oh, no doubt about it. I think first you look at Matthew Stafford, who is actually having a pretty decent season despite the Lions' losing record. Especially since Jim Bob Cooter took over, Matthew Stafford has been unbelievable. He's thrown only 4 interceptions since then to I believe he had 14 before Cooter took over. So he's just playing unbelievable, and especially on this past Monday, he had only 3 incompletions the entire game. I think if your first move is to get rid of Matthew Stafford, if you're the new GM, then you're fired already. That's just a horrible move. There's so many teams out there that would just love to have Matthew Stafford. And then on to Calvin Johnson. Obviously, he's only 30 years old at this point. There's still a lot of talent there, still a lot of ability. I think maybe they might go and do kind of a pay cut for him this season if he's willing to take such a thing. Trading him is just not an option. To find any team that's willing to take on a $24 million hit this year or in 2016 rather, is going to be pretty hard to do, and that's the peak of Calvin Johnson's cap hit throughout this contract as well. So it's going to be really hard to trade him and to cut him and still pay him $18 million over the next 2 years is definitely not an option. So I think you'll definitely see Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson in Lions uniforms next season.
Now, when we talk about Jim Caldwell, obviously, in my personal opinion, what happened against the Packers in that failed defense of the Hail Mary sort of sealed his fate coming back. But if they do finish 7-9, do you think Caldwell can make an argument to come back? Obviously, it'll be up to the new general manager, but obviously the Ford still like him. So do you see him at any point coming back if they finish the season strong, or no?
I don't think there's any chance that Jim Caldwell is coaching the Detroit Lions next year. Usually with a new GM, they're always going to want to bring in their own coaching staff. That's a certainty in this league. But for me, the Hail Mary that really took the wind out of Coach Caldwell's sails. But for me, it was the game against St. Louis where they're going into the final stretch of the game with 2 minutes and 5 seconds left. Essentially, they gave their defense 4 timeouts to try and stop the Rams' offense. That really all they had to do was stop Todd Gurley, and that was it. They could have got the ball back with a good enough time for Matthew Stafford to go to work. Instead, they go for an onside kick, and they burn that potential 4th timeout they would have had with a 2-minute warning, and put together a lackluster offensive drive that probably wouldn't have worked even if there wasn't a bad snap. To me, that just really sealed the deal for Caldwell. And you even see it this past Monday. They're just this conservative offense is just killing Calvin Johnson and these bubble screens and these 1-yard pass or drives by Joique Bell. This stuff needs to go away. And it needs to go away now. So I don't think there's any way that Jim Caldwell survives.
Now, the new GM, obviously, the biggest decision they'll make is about Stafford and obviously what to do with the coach. But it also has to do with developing a culture. So do you think that'll be part of the interviewing process for whoever the Lions bring in? Because talked about changing the culture. Every coach and general manager cycle change. So I'm wondering your thoughts on the notion that the person, whoever takes this job, will have to answer the culture question as well.
I do believe so. Before they hired Jim Caldwell, the culture of the team was let's go out and win, and let's win now with the team that we have. And I think that's going to be the same culture that they're going to hope that the new general manager will answer to. That's going to be what it's all about. They want to win, and they want to win now. I think a lot of people are looking at this team as if they're going to be going into a bit of a rebuild. But I don't think it's going to be as crazy as it seems. I think with the right GM, the right coach, and a heck of an offseason, you're going to be looking at a team that could go to the playoffs next year. It's going to be all about can you deliver, and can you deliver right now?
And when you talk about that, obviously when Calvin Johnson looks at this, do you think he'll wait and see what happens with the new GM and the new head coach, and whether they're in a rebuilding mode when he considers having to take a pay cut possibly to stay with the team?
Well, I normally with any other player I would say that, but Calvin Johnson is he's a whole other animal than any other player in this league. I don't think Calvin wants to leave no matter what. I think he really enjoys playing for the Lions. I know he definitely wants to win a championship, obviously, but he's just such a loyal guy. I just cannot imagine him wanting to leave no matter what. But I do think that he's going to be keeping a close eye on this, obviously, because this is going to be a pretty big part of his remaining time in the NFL. Is Calvin Johnson will probably be retiring within the next 3 or 4 years. So, yeah, I think he's going to be keeping an eye on it, but I don't think it's going to make or break his decision to take a pay cut this offseason.
Now, obviously, Martha Ford is in charge, and obviously the new GM is her most important hire. So do you think that the Lions will move aggressively once the season ends to fill that position, or do you think they'll take their time to find the right person?
Well, I think they're going to jump right into it. January 4th is the Monday after the final game of the season. I think you'll see Jim Caldwell and the rest of the coaching staff excused from the building that day. And I think Sheldon White will probably be going right there with them. So I think we'll probably have a new GM maybe even before the Super Bowl hits. Obviously, they're going to have to, if they're looking at somebody like Tobin from Cincinnati or Wolf from Green Bay, they're going to have to wait until those teams are eliminated from the playoffs before they have a chance to talk to those guys. But I don't see either of those teams making the Super Bowl. So I think, there's a good chance you could have a new GM in place by February and a new head coach shortly after.
Now, with the success that Cooter's had with Stafford since he took over, do you think there's an opportunity that he could remain on the new staff, whoever takes over?
I think there's a good chance that both Jim Bob Cooter and Terrell Austin will have a chance to sit down with whoever the new GM is and whoever the new head coach is. Ultimately, it's going to be their decision from there. I don't see either of these guys lasting until next season. If any of them, it's going to be Terrell Austin. But I just can't see it. I think whoever the new coach is probably has coordinators in mind already.
Now, when we look at who made the Pro Bowl for the Lions, obviously Ziggy Ansah leads the league in sacks, and Calvin Johnson made his 6th consecutive Pro Bowl with the Lions. But I'm wondering if you thought, first of all, what you thought of those selections, and whether you thought Darius Slay got left out of the mix.
Well, yeah, obviously Ezekiel Ansah definitely deserved to be in this Pro Bowl, and to me it's still just a scary thing to think that, this kid isn't even fully developed yet. Who knows what he's going to wind up being in the next 2 or 3 years once he hits the peak of his career. But, yeah, he definitely deserves to be there. And as far as Calvin Johnson goes, I love Calvin Johnson. I've always been a big fan of him, but I think this is a pretty good example of how the Pro Bowl is a popularity contest. I don't think he deserved to be in this game. And the fact of the matter is, and I think we all know it, Calvin Johnson's not going to show up anyways. He never does. So whoever was behind him in voting is just going to wind up getting that spot anyways. And Darius Slay is an absolute snub. Maybe even more than DeAndre Levy was last year. I think Slay has just been unbelievable. And just looking at what he's been able to do, he hasn't allowed a touchdown since, Kansas City, if I'm not mistaken. And to go along with that, he's only been called for one penalty this entire year. When you look at guys like Chris Houston, who used to just get pass interference calls out the yin yang, you got to look at Darius Slay and have a lot more respect for what he can do. He's another guy that, just like Ansa, he's not fully developed yet. So we'll see what he can do next year.
Now, when you look at the core of this team, obviously you've got Ansa and Slay on defense. You're assuming that Stafford will be back, and we'll see what happens with Kelvin. But when you're coming in with a new GM, wouldn't it be smart for the Fords to kind of step out of the way and let someone else with an objective eye that hasn't looked at this roster make some objective and hard decisions? Do you think it will be a difficult transition for the new GM, or considering how much cap space they have, do you think it'll be easier?
Well, I'll tell you what, any GM that's walking into this job has got a pretty cake decision or a pretty cake situation going ahead. You've got a team with over 10 draft picks and a pretty good amount of cap space. I think as far as decision making goes, it should be easy as far as your first few rounds of cuts are going to be going. I think you get rid of a guy like Stephen Tulloch and you excuse guys like Brandon Pettigrew and others. It should be a pretty easy transition for the new GM. I think he's not even going to be thinking about getting rid of Matthew Stafford, Calvin Johnson. He's going to be thinking about how can I build around those guys going into free agency in the draft. So if I'm a GM who's out there looking for a job, I'm looking at Detroit as the place to be.
Now, why would you say that? Would you say that because of the core of offensive talent they have, or the stability and ownership, or why do you think the Lions job will be an attractive job?
I think it's the attractive job because of guys like Matthew Stafford, Calvin Johnson, and you look at others like Golden Tate, Eric Ebron, DeAndre Levy. There was a lot of playmakers on this team already that are just being underutilized. And of course, like I had mentioned earlier, the amount of draft picks that you're getting and the cap space that you're going to be working with, you could walk right into this team, and if you make all the right decisions, you're looking at a playoff team next year. I think that this is a very attractive job based on the players that are on the team and the ability to utilize the cap space and the amount of draft picks that you're going to be seeing this year.
Now, when we look at officiating around the league, obviously the Lions have had their fair share of missed calls that have not gone their way. And you look at what happened in the New York-Carolina game this weekend. Do you think the officials are having a bad year, or do you think it's public perception? Why do you think there's been so much misconceptions with officials this year, and why do you think it's been so bad?
Well, I think there's got to be a lot of new things going into place this offseason, and one of them is definitely going to be the ability to challenge a penalty late in a game. I think anytime that it doesn't matter if it's the Lions or not, anytime that an NFL game is, or any sport for that matter, is decided on what a referee does at the end of the game, I mean, that is just a wasted game. That's a horrible, horrible thing to happen. So I think that they're definitely going to be looking into being able to review those late penalties as a team. I think if you give the Lions an opportunity to throw out some sort of challenge flag after that Aaron Rodgers face mask call, I think the Lions win that game, obviously. And same goes with the batted ball. And and things of that nature. But the referees definitely need to go through another training course this year and figure out what's going on. I think you look at that Giants-Panthers game, and Odell Beckham should have been tossed out of that game. He should have been ejected immediately. So I definitely think they need to go through a whole, just a overhaul there from Dean Blandino down, and figure out a better way to call these games that aren't going to cost any teams wins or losses.
Now, when we look at the Lions, circling back to the Lions, what do you think is the first thing on the to-do list for the new general manager?
The first thing is obviously going to be finding a new head coach. That's going to be the number one objective for this new GM. And then following up on that is going to be making some hard decisions, excusing some players that have been here for a while, or maybe cutting some guys that fans may not want to lose. But, I think that's finding a new head coach is definitely going to be at the top of the list, though.
Now, what do you think about guys like, I know CBS Sports had reported that the Lions may be interested in Adam Gase because of his familiarity with the organization, and that sort of a relationship coming to fruition again. And I know that he had a previous relationship with Jim Bob Cooter. But what do you think about a guy like Hugh Jackson, who put together a dimensional offense in Cincinnati and sort of transformed Andy Dalton into the player that he is? Do you think someone like that would be a good fit for the Lions or no?
I do. I really like Hugh Jackson. I think if the Bengals lose on a Sunday in the playoffs and the Lions jump up with him on Monday, I think he's definitely going to be a top-tier head coaching option for many teams this year based on what he's been able to do with that offense and how he's been able to get Andy Dalton under control this past season after, we've all seen what Andy Dalton has done in the past, and so I think that is going to be one thing that they're definitely going to be looking at as far as Matthew Stafford. Can Hugh Jackson come in and help keep him under control and play to his strengths? Adam Gase, I think that is obviously CBS putting their cart before the horse. I know that it definitely works out if they were willing to keep Jim Bob Cooter. They've got a built-in offensive coordinator there, but I think Adam Gase is a guy that much like Terrell Austin last year, is a guy that's got a lot of shine on him right now. And come this offseason when head coaching interviews begin, I think Adam Gase is going to be finding himself the odd man out and probably remains in Chicago until next year.
Now, Martha Ford's been given a lot of credit for her veracity in making decisions and not standing for mediocrity and all of that sort of a thing. But do you think the Fords would be wise? Well, would the Fords be wise to let the new general manager make the decisions? And what do you think they have to sell as an organization to these top-tier GM candidates in order for them to take this job?
Well, it's a big market team, so that's obviously your first selling point is that you're going to have a lot more money than these smaller markets that are going to be looking for new head coaches like the Cleveland Browns or the Jaguars or who have you. So you're going to have the ability to spend a lot more money for one. Number two is if Martha Ford and their daughters have both come out and admitted, hey, we don't know much about how to run a football team. So we're going to be looking for people to help. And I think Ernie Accorsi is going to be out there looking for the right guy who can bring somebody in. But with that said, you're not going to get much fuss from your team owner. You're kind of going to be given a free run if you're a GM. You can pretty much do anything you want with this team. So I think that's going to be a very attractive thing for a GM who's looking for a new job, they're not going to have to answer to the Fords, or at least not as much as they would to any other team. So those are going to be big situations there.
And it helps that your president doesn't have any football experience either. But
it certainly does too. I think the good thing there is that Rod Wood knows how to spend money, but he's gonna stay out of the way.
So when we look, my final question for you is: when we look at the Lions' remaining schedule, do you think it's more important for them to win to build on next year? Or what do you think the Lions should be looking for in these last two games, which, by the way, are completely winnable for the team?
Well, I think most people look at this and say, well, why not tank out and get a higher draft pick? But to me, that's just it's dumb. So I think the Lions need to go ahead and win out and carry that momentum into their next season. And also, a lot of these guys are going to be auditioning for future roles in different teams or even with the Lions. So there just makes no sense for a team to go out there and just throw their next two games. So there's a lot on the line, even if they're not making the playoffs. So I think they're going to have to go ahead and win out.
And I've got one more for you. Before the Lions went into the game against New Orleans, they were sitting with the 7th overall draft pick. Do you think the Lions, when we talked about this before, you had mentioned upgrading the offensive line. Do you still think that that's the way they go in the draft?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're going to definitely go offensive line first round, left tackle. Got to do it. You got to protect Matthew Stafford, and I think that's going to make a world of difference if they're able to get the right player in there. And I mentioned in the last question there, losing out for a higher draft pick, but the Lions have quite a few draft picks going into this draft, over 10, in fact. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Lions trade up in the first round this year. So if you're a big fan of having Tunsil and he's available somewhere in that 5 to 10 region, don't be surprised if the Lions decide to trade up to get him.
Mike, we want to wish you all the best this holiday season, and thank you for your contribution to the show. And we look forward to talking some Lions off-season football with you in the new year, buddy.
Yeah, I appreciate being on here, and appreciate you guys wanting me to be here. And have a good Christmas, and enjoy your new year. And I'll talk to you next year.
Go Lions!
Go Lions! Yeah.
Have a good day, buddy.
You too, Kevin. Thanks.